Rising from the sands of Egypt, bathed in the golden glow of the desert sun, stands the Great Pyramid of Giza, the last survivor of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It has towered over humanity for nearly 4,500 years, inspiring awe, reverence, and endless speculation. Each year, millions travel here, standing in silent wonder before this colossal structure, believing they are gazing upon the greatest tomb ever built. But what if? The greatest mystery of the Great Pyramid isn't how it was built, but why? To begin our investigation, we must open the official case file number 481, The Tomb Theory. The orthodox story, taught in universities and museums across the world, is clear and consistent. The Great Pyramid was constructed around 2560 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. It was designed, we are told, as his eternal resting place, a stairway to the afterlife. The Egyptologists argue this was the pinnacle of funerary architecture, the culmination of decades of evolving pyramid design, from the step pyramid at Saqqara to the bent pyramid to the red pyramid at Dashur, each experiment in stone leading to the perfection of form. Here, at Giza, the tomb theory paints a picture of Pharaoh Khufu, commanding the resources of an empire, marshaling tens of thousands of laborers, engineers, and craftsmen to raise to 0.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing up to 80 tons, stacked with such precision that even today a razor blade cannot fit between them. Why? To build a fortress of eternity, designed to protect Khufu's body and his soul as he journeyed into the afterlife. According to the mainstream narrative, the workforce was not slaves, but skilled laborers organized into crews, fed and housed in a vast workers' village discovered near the plateau. The diary of an overseer named Mirror, found in 2013, records the transport of fine white limestone blocks, shipped along the Nile, then dragged inland to Giza. It is, without question, one of the oldest surviving written documents in history, and for many Egyptologists, it is the smoking gun of construction logistics. And what of Khufu himself? His presence, it is argued, is felt here in several ways. Most famously, the so-called Khufu ship, a 43-meter-long solar bark, discovered buried near the base of the pyramid in 1954. Symbolic vessels like this were meant to ferry the pharaoh's spirit across the heavens, a divine chariot into eternity. Inside the pyramid, at the heart of its labyrinth of passages, lies the king's chamber, housing a massive granite box, widely assumed to be Khufu's sarcophagus. This, say the scholars, is the centerpiece of the entire monument, the final resting place of a god-king. In this telling, every stone, every passage, every chamber serves the funerary purpose. The queen's chamber, the subterranean chamber, the grand gallery, all part of an elaborate spiritual architecture designed to guide Khufu into the afterlife. This is the official story, passed down through textbooks, documentaries, and guided tour. It is logical. It is elegant. It is widely accepted. But there's a problem, a series of problems, in fact. And when we examine the evidence more closely, cracks begin to appear in the case file. And so begins our cold case investigation into the greatest monument ever built by human hands, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Every good investigation begins with respect for the official story. But soon enough, the facts start whispering a different tale. So let's look closer at the evidence that doesn't fit. Exhibit A, the missing body. For a monument built as the ultimate royal tomb, There's one glaring omission: a body. When explorers first forced their way into the Great Pyramid, centuries ago, they found the chambers utterly empty. No sarcophagus lid, no mummy, no treasures to accompany the king. Egyptologists argue that the body must have been stolen by tomb robbers. But here's the problem. The Great Pyramid is unlike any other tomb. Compare it to the Valley of the Kings. There, in nearly every burial, archaeologists uncover mummies, canopic jars, jewelry, funerary texts, and carvings, even when looters had stripped the gold. The evidence of purpose remained, but here, in the largest, most ambitious tomb in history, nothing remains. No inscriptions, no coffin fragments, no royal remains, only silence. It's as if no one was ever buried here at all. This brings us to Exhibit B, the so-called sarcophagus, a massive granite chest, rough-hewn inside, with no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no carvings of gods or sacred texts. This alone is deeply unusual. For pharaohs, even the innermost coffins were lavishly decorated, etched with protective spales, designed to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. But the king's chamber box, stark, silent, empty. And there's another mystery. The box is too large to fit through the narrow corridors leading to the chamber, which means it must have been placed here before the pyramid was even finished. If this was simply a tomb, why build such an inaccessible container for a king's body that, by all accounts, never arrived? Some researchers even note the interior dimensions of the box resonate acoustically at a precise frequency, hinting at an entirely different function. But that is a clue we will return to later. And then, Exhibit C, perhaps the most damning evidence of all, the silent walls. Every pharaoh's tomb we know of, from the modest to the magnificent, is drenched in symbols. Walls covered in hieroglyphs, sacred spales, painted scenes of gods and kings. These were not decoration, but essential tools, guiding the soul through the afterlife. So why, in the greatest monument of them all, do we find nothing? The Grand Gallery, bare. The Queen's Chamber, bare. The King's Chamber, bare. Not a single glyph. Not a single painted scene, not even Khufu's name, except for a disputed quarry mark, hidden in a relieving chamber above the ceiling, and discovered only in the 19th century. It's a silence that echoes louder than words. If this truly was the most important tomb in Egyptian history, why is it the least Egyptian of them all? One could dismiss one anomaly as coincidence, 2 as an oversight, but 3, a missing body, an empty box, and silent walls. This isn't the profile of a tomb, it's the profile of something else entirely. And if the official story doesn't hold, then we must ask, what was the Great Pyramid really built for? In every investigation, there comes a moment when the physical evidence speaks louder than any theory. The Great Pyramid is not just stone piled on stone. It is a message, written in geometry, in alignment, in resonance. Let us examine this evidence, piece by piece, as though decoding the forensic report of a crime scene, carved into the desert bedrock. First, the orientation. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, deviating by just 3 arc minutes, less than 1/20th of a degree. Modern engineers with GPS and laser surveying struggle to achieve such precision. Yet here, 4.5 millennia ago, supposedly with ropes and copper tools, they nailed it. And then, there are the faces, not 4, but 8. Each side of the pyramid is ever so slightly concave, dividing the faces into subtle halves. This detail is invisible from the ground, discernible only during sunrise and sunset on the equinoxes, when shadows reveal the illusion of 8 sides. Why design something that only the sun, twice a year, could reveal? Was it an accident? Or was it deliberate astronomical coding? The mathematics hidden in its proportions are equally staggering. Take the perimeter of the base, divide it by twice the height. The result, 3.1416, pi, to 4 decimal places. Or consider the relationship of the pyramid's slant angle. It encodes the golden ratio, phi, a number revered by artists, architects, and even in nature's spirals. Some researchers argue the entire monument is a scale model of the northern hemisphere of the Earth, at 1 to 43,200. In other words, a structure in stone that mirrors the planet itself, as though the builders wanted us to see Earth from the sky, long before satellites ever existed. And then we step inside. The Grand Gallery, a vast sloping corridor unlike anything else in Egypt, 47 meters long, 8 meters high, lined with corbelled limestone walls that rise in perfect symmetry. But why? A passage this grand serves no obvious funerary function. Its steep angle, its precision, its scale make it one of the strangest features in ancient architecture. Along the walls, mysterious grooves run the length of the gallery. Black scorch-like marks appear in places, as though some intense process once played out here. And at its end, the so-called King's Chamber, a granite vault built from blocks weighing up to 80 tons, transported hundreds of kilometers from Aswan. Why use granite here, when the rest of the pyramid is mostly limestone? Granite loaded with quartz crystals, a material with piezoelectric properties, capable of converting vibration into energy. Perhaps the most telling features are the so-called air shafts. Two narrow channels extend from the King's Chamber, and 2 from the Queen's Chamber, each just 20 centimeters wide, too small for ventilation. For years, scholars assumed they were symbolic, but in the 1960s, astronomer Virginia Trimble noticed something remarkable. These shafts align not randomly, but with specific stars. One pointed to Orion's belt, the celestial home of Osiris, god of resurrection. Another to Thuban and Draco, the pole star at the time of construction. In other words, the shafts were stargates, designed not for air, but for light, for alignment, for a cosmic purpose far beyond a mere burial chamber. Finally, we consider the physical properties. Why granite for the inner sanctums? Because granite vibrates. It resonates. In recent studies, researchers found that the King's Chamber amplifies sound at specific frequencies. The granite box inside resonates around 438 Hz, close to the musical tonava. Experiments have shown that even a human voice chanting within the chamber can set the walls humming. What possible purpose could this serve? Some argue it was ritual. Others suggest it was functional, a deliberate harnessing of acoustic resonance. Imagine a structure designed not only to stand against time, but to interact with sound, with vibration, with the very physics of energy itself. When we add it all up, perfect alignment to the planet, hidden faces revealed by the sun, encoded constants of the universe, shafts that point to stars, chambers built of resonant stone. This is not coincidence. This is design. But design for what? If the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, then what was it? Every investigation eventually reaches this point, where the evidence no longer fits the official story, and we must look at alternative suspects. 3 leading theories have emerged, each very different, each controversial, but each attempts to explain the same riddle. Carved in stone at Giza, The first theory suggests that the pyramid complex was never just about death, but about time itself. Look at the arrangement of the three Great Pyramids. Their layout on the ground mirrors the stars of Orion's belt. This is the foundation of the Orion correlation theory, proposed by Robert Bauval. But the theory goes deeper. The Great Pyramid shafts align with Orion and Thuban, and some researchers argue that the entire plateau was built as a vast astronomical observatory. Why? To track the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, lasting 25,920 years. This is not something you can notice in a lifetime. It requires careful observation over countless generations. If true, it means the builders were encoding a cosmic calendar, one that spanned tens of thousands of years. Was the Great Pyramid the ticking hand of the oldest clock on Earth? The second theory is even more radical. Engineer Christopher Dunn proposed that the Great Pyramid was not symbolic at all, but functional, a machine. According to his power plant theory, the internal chambers acted together like parts of a complex reactor. The Queen's chamber may have been filled with a chemical solution. The shafts could have served as input and exhaust systems. The Grand Gallery, with its grooves and burn marks, may have housed resonant machinery, amplifying vibrations. And the King's Chamber, built from quartz-rich granite, would have converted these vibrations into energy through piezoelectric effects. Dunn argued this system could have produced microwave energy, transmitted wirelessly. In other words, the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but an ancient power station. To many scholars, this sounds impossible, yet it explains details that funerary theory cannot. The scorch marks, the acoustic resonance, the use of granite for energy, not just strength. If true, then Giza may not have been a necropolis, but the heart of an energy grid, 5,000 years ahead of its time. The third theory moves beyond stone and physics into the realm of spirit. Some researchers and mystics believe the Great Pyramid was designed as a tuning device. The King's Chamber resonates at a frequency of 438 Hz, very close to natural harmonic scales. When voices or instruments sound within the chamber, the entire room vibrates in sympathy. Could it be that the pyramid was intended to alter human consciousness? Not a tomb, not a machine, but a temple, designed to create a state of altered awareness. In this view, the pyramid was a gateway between worlds, a place where the vibration of stone and sound aligned the mind with the cosmos. It may have been a spiritual engine, harmonizing the human body, the earth, and the stars. Three suspects: an astronomical clock, an ancient power plant, a cosmic resonance device. Each challenges the official narrative. Each points to a purpose beyond burial. The question remains: which, if any, is true? And what does it mean if the most famous monument on Earth is not what we thought it was at all? After all the evidence, the contradictions, the theories, we are left standing before a riddle carved in stone, a so-called tomb with no body inside, walls that carry no inscriptions, no funerary texts, yet within its design, the very constants of the universe, pi, phi, the dimensions of the Earth itself, a structure aligned with the stars, as if it were built not just for one pharaoh, but for all of time, and crafted with materials that resonate with energy, as though it was designed to interact with forces we are only beginning to understand. The truth is, we do not know with certainty what the Great Pyramid was meant to be, but one thing is clear: to call it merely a tomb maybe to diminish the greatest inheritance left to us by the ancient world. This monument is not an answer, it is a question, written in stone, across the millennia. And that question is this: what have we forgotten? What knowledge, what wisdom, what purpose slipped through our hands? When history buried the secrets of the Great Pyramid, now the question is yours. What do you believe the Great Pyramid was built for? Share your theory in the comments and join us on this journey, because the investigation is far from over.